Hello, hello.
Hello,
Hi.
Rabbi,
Charlotte. Long time no see.
at least 20 minutes or half an hour.
Yep. Hi, Susie.
Hi.
I assume you were trying to reach me about getting on.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, you're on. Hi. Sorry, sometimes the computer moves slowly.
Hi, Carol. Hi, Charlotte.
Susie, I saw your son, Josh, the other day.
Wait, you saw who?
Josh and Nancy and the children.
When?
Sunday at around dinner time. At
Where were you?
display concert in Summit, related to 9/11. That was that was the reason for the concert. And Susie drove me, and then we drove to Ariel's house and had a little piece of pizza, and saw the kids. I hadn't seen Josh in so many years.
So wait, I don't
Hi, Rabbi
understand. Where
Zucker.
did you see Josh?
Hi, Yodi.
At Ariel's house.
Oh, I forgot. I have
Oh,
to take this out. You can't hear.
Okay. Looks like pretty much everyone is here, so I'm going to start sharing the screen. And let me enlarge it so it's somewhat readable. There we go. So I hope everyone is doing well. Once again, we've got a parasha that is just chock full of material. Some
I
of
can't
it
hear you.
I can.
I can
I
Can you
too.
hear?
Can everybody hear?
No.
Yes.
If you can hear, raise your hand.
All right,
Very
wait a
funny.
minute. Let me just wait a second here.
Nope, can't hear you.
I've got the microphone on,
Heard
and
you before. I don't know.
Well, let's rephrase this. Can anybody here not hear Rabbi Papi at all?
Right now I can hear. I don't know.
Okay, so you're all set.
okay, we're all fine now.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, good. Let me call the screen back up again. Then I lost everybody.
You didn't lose us.
No, I just I wanted to see
We
everybody.
just, hide and go seek.
Ah, sorry, it just keeps oh, there we go. All right, thanks. Oh, and here's Shell. I knew he was coming. Hi, Shell. I'm assuming you're here.
He's connecting.
Okay. All right.
There
So
he is.
again, coming back to Parashat Ki Tetzei, just so much. There are, as I've mentioned before, a number of in shul in our classes. We're now in the guts of Devarim, the collection of laws, and we've got a lot of laws here. A lot of laws that are very, very famous, such as the law of sending away the mother bird if you want to take the eggs. There's the law of the recalcitrant child. I was so happy that this was my daughter's bat mitzvah parasha, so I could make sure that she knew that section. Of course,
And the Mishnah, that it doesn't apply to girls.
that's true. That's true. It was enough that I was teaching her Torah. I didn't have to, go into all the Talmudic literature. So I think she should study Talmud, but that's my opinion. Yeah, of course, a continuation of the laws of warfare, how we treat a woman who is taken captive in war. There are agricultural laws. There are laws relating specifically to God. Got a lot of laws relating to bein adam l'chaveiro, from between one person and another. Some incredibly thoughtful and compassionate laws, and some pretty harsh laws as well. Laws toward animals, not muzzling an ox when it is threshing the grain, and I mean, just a lot of stuff. So I encourage you to follow along very well in Shabbat morning and just, read the whole parasha. We're not going to cover all of it. I'm just going to take a look at two sections. Again, looking a little bit at some of the halachic development, not in any great detail. I don't want to pretend, but just some things that do stand out, and we should take note of them, more than just saying they're in the parasha. So we have at the beginning of chapter 22, I believe, a very famous section here. Who would like to read?
I will.
Okay, thanks, Susie. This is from the biblical text itself.
You are not to see the ox of your brother or his sheep wandering off and hide yourself from them. You are to return, yes, return them to your brother. Now, if your brother not be near you, or you do not know him, you are to bring it into the midst of your house. It is to be there with you until your brother makes inquiry about it, and then you are to return it to him. Thus you are to do with his donkey, thus you are to do with his garment, thus you are to do with anything lost of your brother that is lost by him, and you find it. You are not allowed to hide yourself.
Okay, so what are these laws talking about?
Returning objects.
Yeah, returning lost objects. So, sorry, I just had to pull a Mishnah off the shelf. There is a whole tractate that deals with returning lost objects. Baba Metzia, the
You mean a
First-
whole chapter, Rabbi Papa?
yeah, a
not
whole
the
chapter.
tractate.
Sorry, not a whole. But Baba Metzia, there are actually three. The first Masechet in the Tractate of Nezikin of Damages actually deals with the first Masechet of Nezikin was originally called Nezikin. It's been divided into three sections: Baba Kama, first gate; Baba Metzia, second gate; and Baba Batra, last gate. And the Baba Metzia was the first chapter, deals with the laws of lost objects. It's also traditionally one of the first sections that someone studies, because we frequently deal with lost objects. And it's obviously very important. I mean, from reading these, the laws here, how would you say that the Torah considers this important?
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah, what in particular? It's like, not only are you supposed to return lost objects, but how do you have to, what's the process you have to go through even to do so?
You have to make an attempt to find the owner. And if you can't, then you're supposed to treat the animal like your own and take care of it.
Yeah, you're supposed to watch over the whatever it is, whether it's an animal or a garment. You have to take responsibility for it. So it's taken very seriously, and those who have gone to Jewish summer camp know very well. We used to announce after meals, Hineni muchan mizuman l'kayem mitzvat hashavat aveda. I am ready and prepared to fulfill the mitzvah of returning lost objects. And they would hold up caps and mitts and, whatever was lost. This was very important. And by the way, it goes on a little bit. Susie, read the next verse.
You are not to see the donkey of your brother or his ox fallen by the wayside and hide yourself from them. You are to raise it up together with him.
Okay, so on one hand, we have to return lost objects, but also, according to this verse, how are we supposed to relate to the property of our fellow?
Just,
No, just not a hidden question, not a trick question, but when
take care of
helps
it.
take care of it. Yeah, show responsibility. And this is also something, and this is also laws in the Tractate of Nezikin, and whether if you're watching something for somebody, what are your responsibilities? And that there's one of the things that Jewish tradition is very concerned about is showing respect for someone else's property, not just the person, but the property. In fact, I believe it's Rambam, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, who makes the comment that "V'ahavta l'reyecha kamocha," very famous verse, love your neighbor as yourself, but it uses an unusual preposition. It uses "V'ahavta l'reyecha kamocha." Normally, you would think of "V'ahavta et reyacha kamocha," like we say "V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha." Generally, it takes the preposition "et." For direct object, this seems to be an indirect object. V'ahavta l'reyacha, the love for your neighbor, is saying that, oh yeah, it's for his property. You have to care for his property. So this is something that, just an important value in Jewish law. And, there are a couple verses on it here, and there's a lot of stuff in the Talmud, and we should know that this is serious stuff. We'll see it in a moment in Ramban, but there's one phrase that appears in both of these sections, that when you find something of your neighbor that is
Raise it up
lost,
together with him.
pardon me?
Raise it up together with him.
Raise it up together with him. But when you see a lost object, or when you see that there's a problem, what may you not do?
Ignore it.
Right. You can't ignore it. You are not allowed to hide yourself. That appears twice. And so we just take a look at what Rashi has to say about this. Susie, go on.
You are not allowed to hide yourself. You must not cover your eyes pretending not to see it. If a person takes
Wait. That's just Rashi. That's so, you can't pretend not, if there's a problem, you can't pretend not to see it. And this has been understood in later Jewish tradition in many different ways. And in particular, our responsibility to, if there's a problem, to respond, to take action. We can't just ignore problems. We can't turn away from what's happening. We can't turn away from, this is already getting into the, if you will, the sermonic understanding of this later on in Jewish tradition. We have it a lot in the Hasidic tradition, but we use it many times today. Most rabbis probably have given some sermon at some point on lo hitalamta mehem. You cannot hide from it. So just worthwhile to point that out, and you can explore, I'm sure in all of the Chumashim, there is somebody making an important comment on that. But let's take a look at returning the objects. Just a little bit to see, again, we're not going to look at all of the Gemara, but just a couple places that are kind of interesting from the Mishneh Torah. Susie, you can go on.
If a person takes a lost object and does not return it, he negates the fulfillment of a positive commandment and transgresses two negative commandments. You are not allowed to hide yourself, and Leviticus, do not rob.
Yeah. So for Rambam, it's even more serious.
Mhm.
Not only do you have to return something, that's the positive thing, you are required to return something, but if you don't, you'll be guilty of two negative commandments. So it's, clearly that's just a way of saying this is really important. I mean, it's more than, it's a technical legal point, but it's also It's a way of emphasizing how important it is. Go on.
If the owner of the lost
Even if,
what?
even if.
Even if the owner of the lost object is wicked and eats non-kosher meat for his own satisfaction and the like, it is a mitzvah to return an object that he lost.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
anyone,
Hmm?
whoever your fellow Israelite is, you got to return his stuff, whether you approve of his religious behavior or not. You still have an obligation to him.
And it's weird that they put in as the one thing they mention eating non-kosher meat. I mean, there's a lot of other things that can make a person wicked.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. But I mean, anyone can comment on this because I have no great insight.
Nobody would buy this today. I mean, even among the Orthodox, nobody would buy this today. In other words, this is another example of the Rambam up in his little world, that he creates
Yeah.
for himself that basically does not relate to the actual, I doubt that he's even close to the pshat. Just because it says achicha, it doesn't mean that this wouldn't apply to someone else. It's just talking about suppose you say your neighbor. Does your neighbor
Yeah.
mean someone who's a citizen of the United States? Maybe, but it doesn't have to mean that. So tell me, do I inquire to find out whether or not my neighbor is a citizen before I try to return something to the neighbor that's obviously been lost, misplaced, mail delivered to the wrong place, who knows what? Obviously not. In other words,
No.
all you're doing when you read something like this is to begin to realize that the Rambam comes from the Middle Ages, and that's basically let's not try to in any way hide that fact.
Yeah, and that becomes
We
even
don't
more.
buy this kind of stuff, and even Orthodox people today wouldn't buy this kind of stuff.
No, but you get the sense of where Rambam is coming from, not necessarily where we would be coming from, but in this next section, go on.
If, however, he eats non-kosher meat as a conscious act of rebellion against God,
They just
he is
says he
considered
eats
a
it
non.
lahachis, literally to anger, the conscious act of rebellion against God. That's how they're translating it here. But it's, we talk about some people doing things lahachis, deliberately to provoke. Okay, go on.
He is considered a non-believer. And just as it is forbidden to return a lost object belonging to a Gentile, it is forbidden to return a lost object belonging to a Jew who is a non-believer, heretic, idol worshiper, or violator of the Sabbath in public.
Yeah. So, here he's being very specific.
So why can't you return it?
Well, because the person is considered as kind of rejecting the Jewish people, and therefore you reject him.
Yeah, but that's not the animal's fault. And if
No, I
the
mean,
animal
already, of
will
course,
suffer,
for Rambam, probably moving much more into an urban setting than the biblical agricultural setting. I mean, not that certainly in the Middle Ages people were not living, much closer to nature than we are, but you have to remember that Rambam is a physician, and he's working and he's a leader of a community. He's living within, a particular city. So he's thinking of returning lost objects. And this could be as much political. Who are the people who are his enemies within the Jewish community? And by the way, the return of lost object belonging to a Gentile, we have to remember, today we live among Gentiles and we don't really think anything about it. In fact, many Jews, most Jews probably would, if we choose to live in a Jewish neighborhood, it's much more because we just want to be around other Jews. We want to celebrate the holidays with them. We want to walk to shul with them. We want our kids to have to be on the same schedule, play this, share a life with them. But I don't think any of us, said, "Oh, there are too many non-Jews here. I'm not going to buy this house." I mean, maybe, you don't move to a town that has no Jews, but what I'm saying is that, for us, if we have non-Jewish neighbors, okay, so what? You wouldn't think anything about it. But in the Middle Ages, you kind of had to think about it. It was much more difficult to be surrounded by non-Jews who are very often antagonistic and deliberately oppressing the Jewish community. So very, very different. But then, Rambam also has some other ideas here. Who would like to go on?
I will, Alice. I will, Rabbi.
Thank you,
It
Charlotte.
is excuse me. It is permissible to keep an object lost by an idolater. For Deuteronomy 22:3
Our verse.
speaks of returning an object lost by your brother. Indeed, if one returns such an article,
To a
one,
non-Jew.
one transgresses a prohibition, for one strengthens the power of the wicked peoples of the world. If, however, one returns it to sanctify God's name, so that others will praise the Jewish people and know that they are trustworthy, this is praiseworthy.
So
Again.
he's thinking of Shimon ben Shetach.
What?
Tell the story.
The story is that Shimon ben Shetach, who was a sage generation before Hillel, purchased a donkey from a non-Jew. And when he got it home, he unyoked it, and in the yoke he found a precious jewel. And his students all said, "Oh, what good fortune." He said, no, not proper. And he went back and returned the jewel to the non-Jew who he purchased the donkey from. And the non-Jew, when he received it, said, "Praise be the God of Israel for making such
praise be the God of Shimon ben
honesty."
Zeta.
Pardon me?
He said, "Praise be the God of Shimon ben Zeta."
Shimon ben Shetach. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, but it's so they already, you can see there are other considerations. Yeah, we don't necessarily get along with the non-Jews. Yes, we don't necessarily trust them, certainly during the Middle Ages. But at a certain point, it's worthwhile doing something for them. Go on, Charlotte.
When there is a possibility of the desecration of God's name, it is forbidden to keep an object lost by an idolater, and it must be returned. As part of the ways of peace, we should always bring in their utensils from the outside, lest they be taken by thieves, as we do for utensils owned by Jews.
Yeah, so we don't want to be cursed, but also it's an important concept, not just for Rambam, but in the Talmud, mipnei darchei shalom, because of the ways of peace. We still want to be able to get along with people. And, there are a lot of rules in Judaism that we do, mipnei darchei shalom, for the ways of peace, taking care of the poor, for example, visiting the sick, burying the dead of non-Jews. We do all of this, mipnei darchei shalom, and there are other things. So that, what's kind of interesting is, one, to see the importance of Hashavat Avedah, returning lost objects, and the sense of, if you will, civic responsibility that comes out from Rashi saying, you can't ignore it. You can't pretend you don't see something when there's something going on. And even Rambam, who has, kind of a harsher picture, nonetheless, kind of mitigates some of the harshness by realizing, there are things that we could do. And just as we have respect for the property of other Jews, yeah, we can have respect for our neighbor's property, whether or not we like them, whether we agree with them, so, and I think, even in the Middle Ages, there were not always, not everyone hated the Jews. Not everyone mistreated the Jews. Majority, most likely, but not necessarily everyone. So, okay.
You
And
want
now
not to, okay.
Go ahead, sorry.
You are not to hand over a
Oh, wait,
servant.
we didn't get to it. We're now coming
Oh.
up to, we're going to take a look at another verse. Again, there's just so much in this parasha, but this one I just, found, something we don't always talk about, and it's worthwhile looking at some of these things in greater detail, even taking a look at, say, some of the halachic development, which is part of understanding these verses. Yes, we have a lot of commentary that are specifically from biblical commentators that are trying to explain the biblical text. But interpretation or explanation of the biblical text also comes through our halachic literature, because in fact, there are a lot of laws. I mean, here we are, we're talking about Devarim, and these aren't just laws in the past, but they are laws that apply throughout Jewish history or have been applied throughout Jewish history. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
You are
Now,
not
this is
to hand.
the biblical verse. I'm sorry, I didn't put the verse down here.
You are not to hand over a serf to his lord, who has sought rescue by you from his lord. Beside, you let him dwell among you in the place that he chooses, within one of your gates that seems good for him. You are not to maltreat him.
Yeah. So, any reactions to this just off the bat?
Be decent.
Yeah. But,
Decent human
it's
being.
right. There's already as we'll see, something that's very, very different than in Israel than it was in other cultures.
Mesopotamia.
But in Mesopotamia.
Mesopotamian law codes are very different.
Yeah, we're going to take a look at that in a moment. In fact, let me wait, I'm missing a well, we'll read it eventually in Jeff Teagay's comment. But let's just take a look at a couple of initial reactions. First of all, in the Gemara, well, just to jump ahead, I don't know where I put, I can't find, anyway, just to read the footnote on that, on our verse here,
Teagay?
number 1, Teagay, yeah. That's Jeff Teagay, who authored the commentary on Deuteronomy.
He shall live with you wherever he pleases. This is the antithesis of the terms of an Aramaic treaty requiring extradition of escaped slaves. You must not say to them, live quietly in your place. Live where you are. See his comment on this
Yeah,
section
we're gonna
below.
see that in a moment. So the idea is, if a slave escapes, you can give him refuge. You can let him live wherever he wants. You don't return him. So here's just a brief section from the Talmud that discusses this. Keep going, or just
There was a certain slave who fled from the outside of Eretz Israel to Eretz Israel. His master followed him and came before Rabbi Ami. Rabbi Ami said to the master, we will write a promissory note for his value for you, and you should write a bill of manumission for him. And if you do not do this, I will remove him from you entirely, based on the statement of Rabbi Achai, son of Rabbi Yoshia.
And now we have this teaching of Rabbi Achai, son of Rabbi Yoshia.
As it is taught in a Baraita.
Yeah, Baraita is an early rabbinic tradition from the period of the Mishnah. And the word Tanya refers to an early rabbinic tradition. In fact, in the Talmud, it's the root Taf Nun Yud, really, refers to early rabbinic tradition. So, for example, in Aramaic, the word for Mishnah, for our Mishnah, is matnita. The shin changes to a taf. Mishnah, to teach. So shana, the root of Mishnah means to teach. So to Tanya, it has been taught. Okay, anyway, it's taught in a Baraita.
They shall not dwell in your land, lest they make you to sin against me, for you will serve their gods, for they will be a snare to you. One might have thought that the verse is also speaking of a Gentile who accepted upon himself not to engage in idol worship. Therefore, the verse states, "You are not to hand over a serf to his Lord, who has sought rescue by you from his Lord. What is this Gentile's remedy? He shall dwell with you in your midst."
Okay, so what are some of the assumptions that the Gemara is making here about the situation, not returning a slave?
I think they're assuming that the slave has been grossly maltreated and that he's not running away just to run away.
Possibly. I mean, I think that would, I think is a safe assumption. Yes, that's certainly part of it. What other assumption are they making? I mean, are they how are they identifying this situation? Where is the slave running from? Obviously, he's running from his master, but where is the slave running from, and to where is the slave running?
From Israel to Israel.
No,
From Jew to a Jew.
well, from outside Israel to Israel.
To Israel.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
it
true.
could be from a Jew to a Jew, and one would expect that that's what they're talking about. If the person comes to Rabbi Ami, you can assume that it's probably a Jew, a Jewish master who's coming saying like, wait a minute here, and the rabbi says, no, this is what we're going to do. You're going to we'll write a letter for what he owes you, and you'll write a letter of manumission. And so you're assuming that it's from a Jewish master. But it's also from Chutz la'aretz, outside the land of Israel, Eretz Yisrael, to Eretz Yisrael. And what is the concern? It seems to be being outside the land of Israel.
That there's less of a chance that the slave will be a part of the Jewish nation. I mean, that he'll convert and follow their ways.
Well, yeah. Well, the concern is that he's coming from a land of Avodah Zarah. He's coming from a place of idol worship, and if he comes to Israel, then hopefully he will become part of the Jewish people, and he will leave idol worship. It's kind of the rabbis are making all kinds of unusual assumptions about what the situation is. Rashi kind of summarizes the Gemara when let me go up to the so here can read Rashi's comment.
Understand this as the Targum. Another explanation is that it implies even a Canaanite servant belonging to an Israelite who fled from outside the land into the land of Israel.
Yeah, so here it could very well be from a Jewish servant, from a Jewish master, even a non-Jew, but the chance is you could bring him within Tachat Kanfei Shechina, if you will, under the wings of the Shechina, that he could be brought to be part of Israel. Not necessarily the initial thought that we would have about giving refuge to a fleeing slave. I think, Carol, what you said is that you're assuming he's being maltreated and he's running away to escape from that. But for the rabbis, they're suddenly putting it into a theological context. He's not just running away from maltreatment, but he's running toward a better spiritual life, if you will. Not necessarily the way we would have initially thought of it. Let's take a look at Ibn Ezra, who gives a slightly similar but slightly different interpretation. Who would like to continue?
You are not to hand over a serf. As they go to war, a slave might run away to their camp, and he is not an Israelite.
So now, what's the situation of a slave running away?
He believes in idols. I don't know.
No, here, just from what the comment says. Belechtam lemilchama, as they go to war, a slave might run away to their camp, in other words, to the Israelite camp. In other words, he's escaping from, God knows what slaves have to do in a situation of war. So it might be a situation of war that he's running away from. And by the way, since there's some laws of warfare that precede this in the Torah, Ibn Ezra's reading is kind of clever. He's trying to give a shot reading that, how do we imagine this situation where it could be another situation of war?
Question,
Okay.
why do you understand it as L'Machanehem as in effect our camp would run to Israel? I would interpret it as to their camp.
Most likely, because the situation in the verse is that he's coming to you.
But it's strange that it's in the third person.
Yes, it is. And, and Ibn Ezra brings that out a little bit more. Charlotte, continue. From his Lord.
From his Lord, even though he is not an Israelite, since he, the slave, came because of the honor of God, after whom Israel is named. And if the Israelite were to turn the slave to his master, this would constitute a desecration of God's name. Therefore, you are not to maltreat him.
Yeah, so it's the basic situation is that, at least how Ibn Ezra's understanding, is a non-Israelite who flees to the Israelites, and actually, the way Ibn Ezra's reading it, it sounds much more like someone who's trying to go through a conversion than necessarily a escaping a vicious master. That it's almost the viciousness of the master is that he's keeping him in a situation of idolatry. So kind of an interesting reading here. There's not necessarily the pshat of the text, but he's turning it into an idea that there's something theological here.
The reason you are not
Okay,
to
wait, now
have-
let somebody else give a chance. Somebody else
Okay.
read the reason. And this is now Ramban, who has his own way of thinking about this, although he follows some of the others who would like to read.
I'll read.
Okay, thank you, Carol.
The reason you are not to hand over serf is connected with the section above, that when you go forth against the enemy,
Beginning of our parasha, Ki tetzei lemilchama al oivecha, you go out to war against your enemy. So again,
If it's-
Ramban, Ibn Ezra, connecting it to the context within the Bible.
if a slave flees from his master, against whom the host has gone forth, and saves himself by fleeing to your camp, you are not to deliver him to his master for money that he may give you. And since it states, he shall dwell with thee in the midst of thee, in the place where he shall choose, it appears that it is a commandment that he become a free man and that we should not enslave him. The reason for this commandment is that with us he will worship God, and it is not proper that we return him to his master to worship idols.
Yeah, I mean, not surprising that Ramban would not necessarily interpret this in a pshat way. But here's just the kind of like, and then probably, speaking a little bit about history here, again, a sense where the commentator is not so much commenting on the biblical text as really giving insight into what's going on in his time. Go on.
Moreover, it is possible that he, the bondsman, may show him the entrance into the city, for in that way they will capture many cities through slaves and captives fleeing from there. And our rabbis have said that this prohibition is applicable even to a Canaanite bondman who belongs
Yeah, this
to
means a serf. Sorry, I didn't fix this translation. Sorry.
an Israelite who fled from outside the land into the land of Israel. For this one too should preferably work for those who dwell in the land of God and be saved from working for those that dwell in an unclean land, and where not all commandments are binding.
Okay, so
What does this
here,
mean?
I mean, I think, again, the shot of the text, as Carol mentioned, is, this is, we assume a slave is running away from maltreatment. And especially because the end of the verse is, you shall not maltreat him, that you take him in and give him his freedom, as it were. But again, coming back to what is the pshat of the text, here's what Jeff Tigay writes in his commentary on Deuteronomy. Go ahead.
Wherever slavery existed, there were slaves who escaped from their masters. Ancient Near Eastern law forbade harboring runaway slaves, and international treaties regularly required allied states to extradite them.
And just to jump down, as Rabbi Zucker mentioned, this is very much the case in Mesopotamia. And here, just one example from the laws of Hammurabi, which we always think of. So here you could just read what the law of Hammurabi is.
If a man should harbor a fugitive slave or slave woman of either the palace or of a commoner in his house, and not bring him out at the herald's public proclamation, the householder shall be killed.
Yeah,
Wow.
very different than the
Oh my
than the
goodness.
biblical law.
Killed.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead now. Back in Tigay's commentary, the present law at the top of the page.
Law, in contrast, permits escaped slaves to settle wherever they wish in the land of Israel, and forbids returning them to their masters or enslaving them in Israel. Okay. What happens to a slave who tries to run? I mean, it seems like it makes sense for a slave to try to escape. I mean, he's not going to be killed according to Jewish law, or imprisoned or returned to slavery. So why wouldn't all slaves try to escape?
Well,
I don't know.
Yehudi, you have your hand raised.
You're muted. Yudi, you're muted.
This verse became extremely important in American Jewish history.
Uh-huh.
Around February 1861 or so, Rabbi Einhorn from Baltimore, the Reform rabbi, was opposing the Fugitive Slave Recovery Act, and basically sort of implied that from this verse that fugitive slaves are not to be recovered. And then they asked the Orthodox rabbi in New York, who I believe his name was Morris Raphael. This wasn't the big shining moment for us that day. And he said, well, but if they're fleeing from the same country as they are in, then you don't have to return them. It's only if they're coming from another country. And the way it came out, it's just that this ended up becoming, this is one of the few examples where somebody actually asked our opinion. And you know what happened? Einhorn ended up getting driven out of Baltimore, ended up in Philadelphia. I'm sure our rabbis here are quite familiar with the story. But since you brought up the verse, I just thought I'd mention this. It does have application beyond just the ancient Near Eastern setting.
Yeah. In fact, I tried to do a little bit of quick research, and I really wasn't able to find anything quickly. Because there were Jews, I don't think it was a big number, but there were Jews who were involved in the Underground Railroad. One famous one, their home was one of the stops. It was a guy who came from Europe, and Orthodox background. Is very there's a whole legend about him. Biondi, I think his name was.
The rabbi from New Orleans?
No, not a rabbi.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Not a rabbi.
There was somebody sounding like that, a rabbi from New Orleans.
But that there's a whole there's a legend, which, who knows if it's true, that I guess this guy also fought with James Brown, and there was another Jew who was with them in the battle, and they were yelling over James Bond in Yiddish, like, what are you thinking about? And he says, what should I be thinking about? And he says, what's the line from Kohelet? Oh, come on.
Well, what? Give me a little help.
Kol basar, sof kol
Lag
basar
harbe
hu
igiat
maves.
basar.
Pardon me?
Lag harbe igiat basar.
No. Something like everyone dies.
Akol ha'oich al makom echad.
No, I forget where it was, and then they kind of quoted it with the Yiddish accent. I don't have the legend in
But
front of
Rabbi
me.
Puffy, the point of the story that I was told is this is a historical fact.
Yeah,
This was something that really happened. You have no problem. Pick up any American Jewish history text and you'll see this was one of the first places we actually had a chance to make a splash, so to speak. But what's the Jewish take on this, And in fact, you got to realize in 1861, how many people knew there was a difference between Orthodox and Reform? People who weren't even Jewish. I mean, in other words, all I'm saying is it's interesting that this particular issue, this particular verse became extremely alive at the time of secession.
right.
And that's a historical fact. That's the only reason I mentioned it.
Yeah, well, no, and I'm glad you did. I'm just saying that, there were even legends but there were people who were, I mean, despite the legendary story, the fact is that this person and his wife apparently were one of the stops on the Underground Railroad, and there were Jews involved. I don't know the extent of it. I'm hardly knowledgeable of American Jewish history, to be honest. Okay, go on, Carol, virtually.
Virtually all commentators hold that this law refers to slaves who flee from foreign countries to Israel. He shall live with you among the settlements in your midst. Seems to imply that previously the slave had been in a foreign land and not in Israelite territory. If the law referred to an Israelite slave, it would probably have described him as your kinsman. It would also have addressed the individual householder with whom the slave sought refuge. But the phrase in your midst and the stipulation that the fugitive may settle anywhere in the land imply that the law is addressed to the nation as a whole or to a national authority. What the law bans, then, is returning escaped slave to other nations, the precise opposite of the provisions of ancient Near Eastern treaties mentioned above. The only thing remotely close to this biblical law in the ancient world is the practice at certain temples of granting asylum to slaves fleeing harsh treatment by their masters. Generally, such asylum was not permanent. It protected the slave until he could come to terms with his master, or as a last resort, was sold to another master. By contrast, the biblical law is absolute and treats the whole land of Israel as a sanctuary offering permanent asylum.
Yeah, very, one of the many ways in which the Bible is very distinct, for as much as from the surrounding culture, as much as we use the surrounding cultures, from archaeology and epigraphic evidence and, and of course, all the documents that have been discovered. We use all of this ancient Near Eastern material to shed light on the biblical text. We also recognize that there are some very distinctive elements to the biblical text, and much of the ethics of biblical law is very different than those of the surrounding nations. Go on.
If this law really is limited to slaves from abroad, the absence of a comparable law dealing with Israelite slaves is remarkable. This certainly were runaway Israelite slaves. While some Israelites entered bondage voluntarily to escape poverty and might not be inclined to run away, 15:16 expects some to decline freedom.
And that's the verse that talks about taking an awl and
Piercing the
piercing the ear.
Some were enslaved involuntarily for debt or theft, and even some who entered voluntarily must have been ill-led. We can only speculate on whether there was a comparable rule for Israelite slaves, or whether the 6-year limit on bondage and the provisions for freeing slaves injured by their masters were regarded as sufficient protection.
So again, for Israelite slaves, every 7 years they are released, and if a master in any way injures his slave, the slave may go free, and that's already in the biblical text.
Doesn't,
again-
in fact, Yirmiyahu rail against the aristocracy who have kind of abused releasing in the sabbatical year?
What Yirmiyahu is doing there, Rabbi Zucker, is they made a public announcement that they were going to release the slaves as part of a program designed to bring God's mercy upon them, given the fact that the Babylonians are besieging them. And then when it turns out that the siege was lifted for a little while as a result of an Egyptian feint, F-E-I-N-T, in that direction, then they decided to take their slaves back. So he's attacking them for breaking their word. It's not quite the same as, let's say, Nehemiah, who really, no fooling around, forces people to give up their slaves in chapter 5.
Thank you.
Okay, good. So again, just seeing a little bit how this plays out in later Jewish law. And again, I am sorry that I couldn't find any of the, I didn't have all of my sources to see.
Well, guess what, Rabbi Popke? I just found this, guess where? In the Torah.com from 2022. I'm going to mail this out now. This whole article about the Einhorn Raphael dispute with relation to how this verse should be interpreted at the outbreak of the Civil War.
I found
other stuff. Me a copy too.
Yeah, I found other stuff.
But that's what I meant, Rabbi.
I found other stuff from the Torah.com, but it didn't mention any of that. I was hoping I would find something. Thank you.
Well,
thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Yeah, and I didn't
do it first.
Yeah, and I have, I have some of my history books here, but they were in the office. And anyway, so let's just take a look at Rambam. First of all, the Mishneh Torah. Here is his legal text. Or actually, let me just do this quickly. Sorry, I just have to move everybody here so I can see my text. He says, "Evet shebarach michutz la'aretz la'aretz," slave that flees from outside the land to the land. In machzirin lo la'avdut, you do not return him to slavery. V'alav ne'amar, and of him it is said, lo taskir evet el adonav, you are not to hand over a serf to his lord. Okay, just quoting the text. V'omer l'rabo, and you said, tell his master, sheyichtov lo get shichror. You should write him a document of manumission, v'yichtov lo shtarchov, and a promissory note, bidamav, for his cost, ad shetasig yado, until his hand should reach it, literally, until he can, afford enough money to literally buy his freedom, vayitain lo, and then he gives it to his master. So even though you're accepting a freed slave, you still, he was the property of the master. So you still want the master to somehow be compensated. But if the master does not want to send him, or does not want to free him, the court invalidates his ownership of him, and the slave is free to go on his way. So it's like, this is really not a choice for the master there, and well, let's go on, read what somebody like to read here. This is from his Mora Nevuchim, Rambam's philosophical work. Somebody like to read, or who is reading? Carol, go on, the precepts.
The precepts contained in the laws concerning slaves likewise prescribe only acts of pity, mercy, and kindness to the poor. It is an act of mercy to give liberty to a Canaanite servant for the loss of one of his limbs, in order that he should not suffer from slavery and illness at the same time. The law applies even to the case that a tooth of a slave has been knocked out, much more to the mutilation of other limbs. He could only be corrected with a rod or reed or the like, as we have stated in Mishnah Torah. Besides, if the master strikes a slave too hard and kills him, he is punished with death as for ordinary murder.
That's the owner. So, already in the Torah, we have laws that by which a slave is freed if he is injured. And if, God forbid, he kills his, even though it's technically his property, doesn't matter. He's killed another human being. And that person is guilty of murder. Go on.
Mercy is also the object of the law. You are not to hand over a serf to his lord who has sought rescue by you from his lord. But it teaches, besides, a very useful lesson, namely that we must always practice this virtue, help and protect those who seek our help, and not deliver them unto those from whom they flee. And it is not sufficient to give assistance to those who are in need of our help. We must look after their interests, be kind to them, and not hurt their feelings by words. Thus the law says, besides, you let him dwell among you in the place that he chooses, within one of your gates that seem good for him. You are not to maltreat him. This we owe to the lowest among men, to the slave. How much more must we do our duty to the freeborn when they seek our assistance?
So for Rambam here, he is taking this law to be a model for the mercy and compassion with which we can conduct our relationship with others. So it's very interesting that he's looking not as at the you shall not hand over a serf to his lord, but he's looking at the rest of the verse. What does it mean when it says you should let him dwell among you wherever he finds best? It's that there's even more that we are supposed to do. But
there's another significance to this verse, Rabbi Papki, which is, as a result of using the phrase "Hamakom Asher Yivchar," it becomes clear that Sefer Devarim doesn't think that this phrase is confined just to the place that God is going to choose as a site of the future temple. It clearly simply is a phrase that means, whatever someone chooses to do. And,
right.
that creates a whole different possible meaning. Who's to say that when you say that means one particular place? Okay. I mean, Kasuto pointed this out when I remember in college reading this, that basically, it could be a different place at a different time. It doesn't even necessarily have to be one place. So, in other words, we tend to think that Hamakom Asher Yivchar always means the holy place that God is going to select. Well, it's clear that that's not what it means in this verse at all.
No, it's it's wherever the escaped slave.
Right, exactly.
It was good. Okay, but now we get back to Rambam. We see pretty much what we saw a little bit earlier in some of his statements in terms of returning lost objects. Go on. But on the other hand,
hang on, let me just. But on the other hand, when sinners and evildoers seek our help, it must not be granted. No mercy must be shown to them, and the course of justice must be interfered with, even if they claim the protection of which is the noblest and highest. For thou shalt take him from mine altar that he may die.
Yeah, that's if somebody deliberately kills someone. If somebody kills somebody by accident, we know that they can flee to a city of refuge, and then God says, well, if somebody kills somebody else deliberately, right from they can run to the altar, but even from the altar, you take them away. Go on.
Here a person comes to seek the help of God and claims the protection of that which is devoted to his name, God. God, however, does not help him and commands that he be delivered up to the prosecutor from whom he fled. Much less need any one of us help or pity his fellow men under some circumstances,
under such circumstances.
because mercy on sinners is cruelty to all creatures. These are undoubtedly the right ways designated righteous statutes and judgments in Deuteronomy 4:8, and different from the ways of the fools who consider a person praiseworthy when he helps him protect his fellow men without discriminating between the oppressor and the oppressed. This is well known from their words and songs.
So on one hand, Rambam is learning a great deal about mercy and compassion. On the other hand, he says, yeah, it's sometimes worth it to think about who are you showing compassion to? Who are you trying to help? There are some people who deserve it. There may be some people who don't deserve it. We don't necessarily like talking about those things today. But there is something
A rather timely citing of this text.
yes. I think many of us are deeply disturbed by the amount of death and destruction in Gaza. On the other hand, many of us feel that, Israel does not have a choice. I mean, a whole nother story, how, are there innocent civilians in Gaza? But, I think that, there certainly are. But, the world, not just Israel, everyone likes to point out Israel's flaws, but every other military, every other country, often does what it has to do to protect itself, and realizes that there's some people who really, they are not the ones who we can show compassion to. It's difficult, it's painful, it's hard, but overall we see from just a couple laws that how our tradition is really trying to argue on the side of mercy, showing respect for other people and compassion for them, and even for their property, returning lost objects. A lot of stuff in this parasha, but just two small little mitzvot that aren't so little. All right, and thank you. I got the article, Yehudi. Thank you very
good.
much.
I sent it to everybody.
Yeah,
You should
but I
all have it
really,
in your mailboxes.
I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
All right, I'm surprised. All right,
Bye,
Kol Tuv,
everybody.
everybody. Have a good
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbos.
Thank you.
Stay well. All right, let me.